Hey, what's up? John Sonmez from SimpleProgrammer.com. Walking through the casino here. I got Luis Perez here, and and if you've been seeing Simple Programmer improve, at least the design of it, of the blog, it's because of this guy right here. We just happened to meet up at MicroConf, and I thought I would ask Luis a little bit about his design. He's been really helpful to me, in just like volunteering. Like, and I actually use you as an example in a video because I said, now I remember where I said that, if you're gonna like apprentice for someone or like try to get someone's help or try to like meet someone who you are, who maybe is busy running a bit, want to get their advice or something. You don't like ask them, you don't say like, what could I do for you? Instead you like, look, I know you have this problem and I solved it for you and here it is. And that's like, when you sent me the mock-up, normally if someone said I'm going to improve the design of your site, I wouldn't even reply. But you sent me like, this is the better thing. This is like the actual thing. So that was pretty cool. So hopefully we're in frame here. But anyway,
let's just like you're talking to yourself.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about basically, the design, how you got the skills for the design and kind of what the approach is, or what do you think about it? And then I've got some things that I think about it, but
yeah. This is really tough for me to answer. We were just talking about a moment ago. I'm mostly a technical person.
Yeah.
And the design thing is on the side. I like design. I always have. It's not my primary thing, but I did some stuff for you, as you mentioned, and you liked it.
And that's why I'm asking you, by the way, is because there's a lot of people I know, because I'm getting emails of developers that design is not their primary thing. So like, you're an excellent example because it's not your primary thing, yet you're good at it. So that's where I think you can help people that, rather than someone who's just good at design, who's a designer. So
I will tell you this, right? I've been programming for a very long time. It's been about like 20 plus years.
Yeah.
And what basically happened is I got good at the technical side, but I still noticed that, customers are complaining about something or they didn't know how to do one particular thing. And I was like, well, the functionality is there, right? And it works, right? So what is it, right? And I found that this part was very difficult for me to do it, and I experienced the same thing when I was telling other people about it. But if you just watch them use it, and then they ask, right, and then you say, okay, what are you thinking when you're doing this? Why did you click there, As opposed to fighting your urge to say, no, go over here and do this, right? And then when they started to explain it to me, I was like, oh, okay, they thought it meant this.
Right.
And either, it could have been design, it could have been the wording on something.
Right.
So what I would do next time is I would change the wording, and I would see if they at that point understood it without having to ask me. And I would ask them again. I would show it to the beginner. Why don't you try it now? Again, not telling them what I did.
Right.
And then they would click on it. So it was like, I guess, I saw the app holistically.
Yes.
Right? It was everything from what it did to how easy it was for them to use it.
Right.
And other times it turned out to be because, that they couldn't find a feature.
Right.
Right? Which again is kind of usability and it's kind of design.
Right.
And in some cases I found that they felt like there was too much on the screen.
Right, okay.
And it was just to kind of testing that I found this stuff. Like for the site, you mentioned the changes that were made to the site.
Yeah. Talk about maybe how you went through that process.
Right. So what I found in some cases, like if you have, let's say, 20 or 30 different pieces of functionality, they're all toolbar buttons. They kind of didn't see the one that they needed to see.
Right.
And I noticed on other apps that they did like using, and I started to kind of compare the difference, right? I have toolbars, they have a toolbar. What's the difference, right? And I started like almost looking at the pixels themselves and go, okay, well my toolbar, and if you remember this, toolbars used to be like this. Each one was like a little button.
Yeah.
So each one had a frame around each little toolbar, which apparently was adding a lot of noise visually, so that it was hard for them to just notice the icons.
Right.
So in those cases, you take off the button around it and just leave the icon itself, and it turns out, okay, they found that even easier. And then there were similar things to that. For example, the buttons that they used the most able to make them a little bit bigger, you know? And if you think about it, it kind of makes sense. Like if you think about it, like if you have a text document, you have regular text, right? And if you want it to stand out, you make it bold, right? And if you wanted to stand out even more than the bold one, you make it bigger and bold. That's one example of using techniques to highlight something. But I think I also found the opposite was very important. So whatever they didn't need to use a lot, you did the opposite. Because if you bolded every single word in a document,
you need contrast, right?
Right. Yeah. And I think that's probably a good way, actually, now that I'm talking about it, to describe it. That there's a balance and you feel it, right? If you had a paragraph and every other word was bold, it would be kind of hard to read it. And then you notice that little thing. And I think a lot of what I notice about design is kind of that. Like you look at something, it doesn't feel quite right, and then you just try what I did before. I just tried 20 different things, and then one of them felt better. And then after a while, I noticed the pattern, and then I think that's how you would generally develop that. I think one of the key aspects there is to. What I found for me was that to realize that the design is part of your application and that it's important. And I think once you go from that, you almost use the same approach as you use for development. Like you would write a different algorithm, you would code it a different way until, for example, when you have an algorithm, you might refactor the code that doesn't perform any different, but it's easier for you to read and more comprehensive when you look at it. And I feel like that's kind of similar.
Okay, so I think maybe most developers, like myself, if I was trying to design something, I think about the design, how it should look, whereas like everything you're telling me is based on how it should be used, and that's driving your decisions. And then the other thing that I think that you're pointing out that I wouldn't have known to do, which is to like have different variations of it to see what would it look like if I did this, whereas I would just try to come up with the one thing, and then I'm like, oh, that doesn't look good, I can't design. And I think a lot of developers, the other thing I was going to ask you about is, you're so good with CSS. Do you feel like the CSS skills that you have gives you the ability to actually implement what you think in your head? Because I think, and maybe that's like a challenge that a lot of developers, I know it's a challenge I have, like some of the things, I'll sit there and I'm like, oh, like I want to change this thing, but it's not looking right, so I just give up. Like, do you feel like that, like if someone wanted to become better at design for a developer, that like getting really good knowledge of CSS would help, or what do you think about that?
So I think the main problem that we often see with CSS is not knowing what CSS can do. Because when you're programming any framework, I'm on Google 20 times a day on Stack Overflow. Right? I didn't know how to do that thing, and I Googled it, and I found it on Stack Overflow. Right? So I don't think that part is usually the challenge. I think that usually what's challenging, if you're not using a framework like Bootstrap or something, you run the same problem you run into regular code. Which is, you have all the same keywords. Everybody has the same keywords, for example, they're programming in C#. But if they don't structure it properly, you have technical, then it's very hard to make changes. And I think a lot of the CSS stuff suffers from that. It's actually not the CSS itself, it's the way that it's structured, and it's very hard to work around it. And I think the only thing you can do for that is to continue to work with CSS and know what properly structured CSS is, the same way that you would for code.
I see. Okay. So and that so like if someone's a developer, they're like, I don't have very good design skills. I think I have a good idea of what I want to see on the page. If they invest in the CSS in CSS skills, knowing how it should be structured, knowing what CSS can do, then they're going to be able to actually create what
So that just like if you had your code and you structured it properly and you didn't incur a lot of technical debt, when you want to make a change in it, it's very easy. As opposed to when it has a lot of technical debt, it's very difficult, even if you know exactly what you want to actually implement.
Cool. Well, thanks. We'll get in frame here if I can get it. There we go. And thanks again, buddy. And if you like this video, subscribe to the channel. Talk to you next time. Take care.